I get asked all the time, probably the most asked question I get is,
hey, why did you paint those letters?
Why did you paint those letters before you did everything?
What's with the letters, dude?
well, today let's answer that question. Hey everyone, my name's Scott Tarbox. I'm an artist working and living in Houston, Texas, and today we're going over 5 tips to help you paint murals like a pro. The first step is to get as much information about the space that you can. It's gonna look a little different whether it's a personal project that you're doing for yourself or for a client. And if it's for a client, I highly recommend having them get as much information for you as possible ahead of time. Some of these specs can be what material is the wall, what are the dimensions so you can give them accurate price quoting and concept creation. Is it indoor or outdoor? Can a lift be used? Can ladders be used? And most importantly, for the way I create murals, a clear front-facing photo of the wall. Whether the mural is indoors or outdoors can determine how long each day you can spend on the wall. If it's indoors, you might have to account for things like closing the business down to paint if you're using aerosol like me, or working overnight. Sometimes I've done jobs where I've had to work from close into the morning. Another thing with the outdoor murals is keeping in mind what the weather might be like, and all of these things can factor into your price per square foot. That's how I like to quote things, price per square foot, and all of that ranges based on certain things that are more or less difficult about the job. Materials like drywall and primed concrete are usually a dream to paint, but unprimed metal and wood tend to present unique problems. Wood and concrete especially should always be primed first, whether you do that or the client. They're very porous, so they soak up a lot of your paint, and you'll end up wasting a lot of it, and the end result usually won't look quite as good. The second step is sketching. The reason that a front-facing photo is so important is because I can't count how many times a client has maybe made an error or misapproximated the dimensions of the wall. And if you start designing your process around that and it's off when you get there, that can lead to huge adjustments that you have to make in your sketch, and it can be a really big problem. The doodle grid is the single most important tool that I've adopted in terms of making mural painting as painless as possible. Also, quick side note, if you have a client that gives you dimensions and they're off by a considerable amount, make sure you have your quote adjusted for that. I don't assume that any of my clients have tried to cheat me or lie to me by lying about the footage or getting it wrong. People just make mistakes. The dozen or so times that it's happened, they've been happy to adjust the price for me. I do, though, usually not say anything if it's only, a small amount. The way that I sketch all of my murals these days is directly onto the iPad. I download an image of the wall, drop the transparency down to about 30%, and then I draw everything on top of this. This is perfect because if there are issues later on, it won't matter because I know that this has been drawn on top of this image and that it fits, no questions asked. And it allows me to work with the wall and maybe come up with creative ways to use the shape. Like if it's an L shape or something where peculiar and you can make your character fit into it in a more fun or creative way. Also, an important thing that'll make your life easier when doing this is that when you're sketching and you create an outline, keep that on its own layer. Most people do that anyway, but that's important for later. You'll see why. Step 3, the doodle grid, the secret weapon. This thing is choice. It has changed my mural painting life. You don't need power. You don't need to make sure you have enough room to back up. You don't need to worry about it being nighttime or the measurements working. Like there are so few things you need to go right for it to work, whereas with the projector, you need all these different specific things for it to work, which I don't really like projectors anyway. I've only used them a couple times when I needed to do big, giant, perfect circles, or I was really running out of time and it worked out. But the doodle grid is just, it accounts for and solves every drawback that the other methods has. It's the best. So you're at the wall with your iPad with a sketch on it from where you drew it originally, and you use this as a reference to put the doodle grid. You don't have to put the doodle grid over the whole thing because you're not gonna need it for the whole thing. You just kind of estimate where it's gonna go and then do that there. If you're off by a little bit, it's fine because you've already drawn the image before. You're just trying to get the proportions and everything as close to possible so you don't have to move anything or rescale it. When I doodle grid, I like to do the alphabet. I go A to Z and then Z to A. That way the same letters aren't stacking up, and that's part of why I'll also include 1 through 9. On top of that, I will also add, for example, if you had the letter A, I would do the letter A but then put a circle around. If I had the letter U, I might put a few little lines through the tops of it, just to add more points of reference, especially if I'm in an area like the face of my character, or just an extra detailed area where I know there's more lines coming through. And once your doodle grid is on the wall, then you're gonna take another picture of the wall from as close to where you or your client took the previous one, and then you're gonna get rid of the first image, take the new one with the alphabet, and then take your isolated outline layer that we talked about earlier and put that on top of it, and then try to match it up as best you can to where it was on the other one. Then you're gonna drop the transparency to where you can see the sketch, but you can also also see the doodle grid. There's a sweet spot where even though these two things will conflict, you'll be able to read them really well. Now you have a very foolproof map of your sketch. The jaw line goes through the bottom of the A, the I comes out through the top of the F. I find the alphabet better than random squiggles because it's so easy and fast to recognize what you're looking at: an A, a B, a 1, a 3, 7, you know, numbers, letters. You read. And I also find that it's the easiest way because then you can even delegate sketching to someone else. There's a very clear map. There's no question about where these things go. So if somebody can just follow those lines and has a basic grasp on pulling lines with spray paint, somebody can help you do it. Whereas the other methods, maybe not as reliably. On to step 4, background and drop shadows. Once the sketch is up, the full painting process begins. I tend to do simple, clean backgrounds with drop shadows, maybe a few pops of color, not so much full backgrounds. And the way I approach this is that I get rid of the doodle grid line, and then I do the solid colors, then I do the drop shadow, and then everything else is working what's in the background most to the foreground. And the reason for this is that with spray paint, it just is easier to paint whatever is in front last. And it's kind of the case with anything, but with spray paint in particular, because you can pull really clean, sharp lines with an angle, and that's a lot harder to do when you're trying to come up near something and kiss it. So it's just a lot easier if you're pulling these lines on top of one another and saving what's in front for last. So here on this piece, I did the blue-gray background first, then the maroon circle, then the drop shadow over all of it. And then that way I don't have to worry about it again for the entire process. Step 5 is finishing everything. I stick to the back to front rule when I'm doing the foreground as well, but tend to work in vertical sections top to bottom. I tend to go back and forth a lot about whether or not I use black. I use 4 to 5 shades of every color I do. Sometimes that includes black, sometimes it doesn't. But when it does, I use that for the main shadows that are actually cast, and I'll do my sketch in black. That I always do initially, so that way if I choose to, I can leave slivers of it for contrast or separation as I'm filling everything in. And I always work dark to light with spray paint. I start with the darkest areas, make big shadows, and then bring in the light to show where it might accurately be hitting it. And then I save any secondary lighting for last. This includes candlelight, glows from diamonds, or little lanterns, anything like that. Then I sign the piece, get my photos and videos, and I'm done with the thing. Side note real quick, these shirts are now available in the store. They were in pre-order for a while. Half of the profits go towards the Texas Equal Access Fund for Women. Thanks so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider hitting the like button, subscribing, or leaving a comment. These things do really help my channel. And if you'd like to support me on Patreon or scoop some merch, there are links to that down below. And if you'd like to watch the entire process of me painting this gator mural, click this video right here.